Has Donald Trump completely surrendered to Putin, and what will the U.S. role in resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war look like now? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Irina Uzlova, and today with me, as usual, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in Wisconsin, Yuri Rashkin. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So we see the next statements by Marco Rubio, U.S. State Secretary. We are tight. It sounds like something like this. We are leaving. It's time to put and to eat. How weak and uncool that it is not exclamation mark by Marco Rubio, but only such points. The United States may withdraw from the peace talks on Ukraine and stop trying to mediate peace agreements between Russia and Ukraine. The deadline for a completely indecisive decision is literally the next few days, unless there are clear signs that an agreement can be reached in order to avoid them. Marco Rubio told that we have spent 3 years and billions of dollars supporting the Ukrainian side, but now we are reached a point where we need to focus on other things. So, Yuri, can we say that the U.S. is actually withdrawing from the issue of resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war, and why? Why?
This is a very interesting situation that we're observing here with Secretary Rubio stating that in just a few days we're either in or out. Because first of all, we know that there's nothing final in the Trump universe. Anything can be relooked at, reworked at least they feel that way. I think that they think that if this thing with tariffs totally backfires, they'll just vote to change the calendar date to April 1st, the day before Liberation Day, and everything will be like it never happened in Trump world. So there's nothing final there. That's one thing. The other thing that comes to mind is a line from Fiddler on the Roof, when a rabbi says, God bless the Tsar and keep the Tsar away from us. And when you have American administration that is leading itself in such a tone that is contrary, the policy of the administration is so contrary to the previous administration that we can basically think that in this scenario that we find, in this reality that we find ourselves in, what is the point of trying to get United States on your side when you know United States would much rather be on Russian side as it stands right now with this administration? What is the point of having negotiations about what? About guarantees for future security? We know that's not going to happen. About Ukraine joining NATO? What are we talking about? So if this is the negotiation about maybe a 30-day ceasefire under, with Russia, which clearly violates everything, then it's unclear the benefit of these negotiations from Ukraine's point of view. However, when we see that Trump administration, which, refuses to acknowledge that they can lose at anything, and considering that they are staring at a loss here, because Trump said that he will fix this in 24 hours, we're still waiting. So that means that he lost, right? This is what people were wondering. What would happen when Trump would realize that he lost? Well, he doesn't recognize a loss. He only recognizes a win. A loss is fake news. So, and what has he done in the past? He has declared bankruptcy 6 times. And what has he done each time following a bankruptcy? He walked away and said that he was smart to get out when he did. This is what we're seeing now. He's getting out, trying to say that I'm smart to get out, and this is going nowhere. Really interesting. Like, did this occur to you prior to elections, or did it not matter because it was so much easier to say that all it takes is 24 hours? I mean, Trump would do it in 24 hours, but maybe he's willing to give it 24 hours. Maybe that's what he meant. He said he's willing to give it 24 hours. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But what happens now is we see reaction from Kremlin, which is clearly not happy with this, because they say, like, all of a sudden Peskov comes out and says, no, there are progress. We're making progress. Lavrov is, this old horse is being dragged out to say that, no, there's progress. We're making some things here. Why? Because for Putin, this is the key point of his vision of the future, is these endless negotiations about different things, which really allow him to conquer, hopefully as he sees it, do his military bidding on the field, and have these negotiation process with United States continuously legitimizing Putin and further covering United States in, frankly, blood for what is happening in Ukraine right now on our watch, that United States administration is refusing to acknowledge and assign responsibility for to Russia. So in this situation, it turns out that Russia is more interested in negotiations than it appears Ukraine, because Ukraine says, hey, we're reaching an agreement here on our rare minerals, and that's kind of moving forward, but and that's a different story. But when it comes to the Marco Rubio statement, it's just remarkable that it seems like there's more concern from Kremlin about ending the negotiation process than there seems to be at this moment from anybody else. So that's another part. And of course, we have to acknowledge this is shameful. This is just shameful that United States finds itself in this situation where instead of providing aid to Ukraine, and I'm glad that this administration acknowledged, of course, they got the numbers wrong, but that's I guess okay. I don't know, because they said that Ukraine owed United States $300 to $350 billion, some phantasmagorical number, and now they changed that it's only $100 billion. Which is still not accurate, because the actual number, as I understand it, is close to $119 billion. I mean, it's a number. It's okay to admit a number, right? No, but first it has to be too high, and then it can be too low. So that's nice that this is being acknowledged, but it's still so shameful that even this, the United States fundamentally would find itself in this position where we see people out there that are going to protest American president for many different things, including his administration's behavior towards Ukraine and towards Russia. That's shameful, but it's a fact.
But I know one man among Donald Trump's colleagues and administration who exactly remember about 24 hours, but different 24 hours. Not 24 hours for ending Russian-Ukrainian war. No. But his smile is always on his face. I mean, the US Vice President, J.D. Vance. He visited Rome, Italy, and he said and noted that even in the past 24 hours, we think we have some interesting thing to report on, J.D. Vance noted. US Vice President said he's optimistic, not like Marco Rubio, that peace will be achieved in Ukraine. He said this after US Secretary of State Marco Rubio threatening to withdraw from the talks. And Vance made the statement, as we see, during a meeting with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Maloney in Rome. I should notice that Giorgia Maloney visited Washington and met with Donald Trump on April 17. So why are we not so optimistic as J.D. Vance? And he remember about all optimistic things and 24 hours.
Interesting question. When we look at the question of 24 hours and the ever optimistic Vice President J.D. Vance in Italy or whatever, he wasn't in Italy, but his statement speaks of it sounds suspicious because it doesn't reflect what we understand to be reality. And on top of that, we know that J.D. Vance is not known to be knowledgeable in this administration. He's certainly not known to be a decision maker, and he certainly has no good feelings towards Ukraine. We know that he's trying to, he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. I think it's a pretty direct quote. So with that in mind, when he's optimistic, you kind of start to wonder. And the only explanation at this point that makes sense to me is that he wants to promote the Russian point of view, which is the negotiations are ongoing. They're moving somewhere. There's a process here. And because who else is interested in negotiations? Marco Rubio isn't interested, apparently. Ukrainians are interested, but considering what the United States is doing, that's hardly much a help. And so it's Russia, apparently, that's interested. So when we see some Republican period come out of this and say we need the negotiation process, peace process to continue, to me that's a pretty direct evidence of Russian involvement in supplying bullet points for such person, because it doesn't really add on. So I'm curious to see what politicians we're going to see to come out and speak in support of this peace process, because it looks a little suspicious right now when Russia is the one mostly fighting for it.
But how do you think, Yuri, can, for example, Giorgia Maloney, or maybe Paris meetings, yes, where Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff and Kit Kellogg were change Trump's approach to war in Ukraine, or bring the US back to a Euro-Atlantic family?
I think that there's a lot of hope that is being placed on Giorgia Maloney's, shoulders and she acknowledged as much, because she said that I understand, I'm under no pressure. She said, I understand that, laughing, because obviously there's a lot of pressure. And she seems to have handled it quite well. And this is a kind of a crucible experience because rather than having joint press conferences, we now see this dog and pony show where we see a room full of officials. Also, we need to acknowledge that apparently Donald Trump had his gold guy, designated gold guy, take a look at the Oval Office and redecorated with more gold, as Donald Trump likes. And so having a conversation there, we see Donald Trump is generally predisposed well towards good-looking European women. I mean, that seems to be a fact. But of course, after that, he knows that as a celebrity, he can do whatever he wants. So it's this kind of a juxtaposition of priorities. In the end, I think that Italy seems likely to continue to enjoy good relations with the United States. Good for Italy. But I will wait and see to see if there's been any change on tariffs, because there has to be proof. They can't be just words. And of course, with Donald Trump, even nice words are already suspicious and a good thing to have, I suppose, but hard to get. But whether there'll be any actions, that's the question, because Italy is facing tariffs like everybody else except for Russia. So we'll see what can happen there. I think that she seems to be the strongest, maybe together with Keir Starmer of Great Britain, two European leaders that seem to be getting along with Trump. But perhaps that just means that Donald Trump is not verbally abusive towards them in personal communication. That's great. But how about some policy? And what kind of reliable policy can there be with Donald Trump? None. And that's why we're having the economic problems that we're having.
Well, what can you say more exactly about that meeting in Paris, where Ukrainian delegation was, where we see Marco Rubio, as I noted, Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg? Maybe it's like we see like the US and Europe unite again, and they can find other paths, ways to communication, to solve some problems in this negotiation process, or no at all?
It's hard to be optimistic about negotiation process that involves Donald Trump. That's kind of probably an understatement. And so what we see with these people is we see a cast of characters, a deck of cards, kind of like almost Alice in Wonderland, where you're all just a deck of cards. And then you see Secretary Rubio, even Steve Witkoff, which is clearly a very close to president person and seems to have the right height to communicate personally with Vladimir Putin, which is clearly important. Those people, they don't have much weight. I think that Steve Witkoff is good at relaying the Kremlin talking points verbatim to president or to any news station that he gives interviews to, but there's no evidence that he has actually any impact on the decisions the president makes, which seem to be only controlled and influenced by Vladimir Putin. Therefore, I presume the negotiation process will continue, and we shouldn't worry about it ending soon if Russia wants it to continue. The rest of the characters that we see, whether it's Kit Kellogg, who changes his position as necessary but seems to play the part of a good cop in this situation, or whether, it's it seems fairly irrelevant because we know the decision maker is in Washington and really not even there, but more like in Moscow. So what is going on? There's a shuffling of deck of cards. It's interesting. It's interesting to watch and to discuss, but there's no real information there anymore. We're seeing some kind of a behind the curtain gamesmanship, and to presume that Russia and will join forces with Europe at the end of this and take on Russia. Russia itself doesn't believe that point of view. There's a publication on their SVR website that features a caricature very much in the style of those that may remember World War II Kukriniksy, famous cartoon trio that was popular during World War II in Soviet Union. Very much in that style, a caricature with a Ursula von der Leyen shaped as a swastika being stabbed in the back on one side by Russia and on the other side by United States. And that's the point of view of Russia now. They feel so confident about Donald Trump being on their side that they are making plans for the future. So I think discussing U.S. and European Union or Europe in general coming together doesn't seem to be how Russia sees things right now.
Bloomberg reported that the United States has presented its allies with proposals that would allow for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, including setting conditions for a cessation of hostilities and easing sanctions against Moscow if a lasting ceasefire is achieved, Bloomberg correspondents report. We see in this article like almost freezing of Russian-Ukrainian war. With that, against statements by Stu Witkoff about 5 territories, about occupied territories, about power of Russian Federation under these territories. But, Yuri, we understand that we will never agree to this. So for what this plan is and for whom?
I cannot be shaken in my conviction that Donald Trump really wants to be in Moscow on May 9th for the big parade on Red Square. Nothing that, is happening. He is just going there no matter what happens. If he has to say the negotiation process is over, he doesn't give a damn about Ukraine anymore, and he can just hug Vladimir Putin because Ukraine doesn't matter anymore because, I guess that didn't work. He tried, didn't happen. All right. Hey, Russia. Hi, Russia. How's it going? It's just all seems like he's trying to quickly wrap things up. But here's the deal. I think Putin is like sending a message that unless Trump wraps it up, Putin is not going to let him in on Red Square. I don't think I think Putin is driving this train. And Donald Trump would like to explain to Putin that he tried. He really, really tried. But this is really hard. And he doesn't do hard. That's not his, work hard. It's not Donald Trump. Small, soft, that's perhaps more along the lines. So he's looking for easy things. Putin is not offering him an easy situation because Putin has a very serious goal in mind of just taking over Ukraine. And so Donald Trump has a very hard job here, which he's failing. He's trying to say, excuse me, please let me off. And so we'll see how this works out. Is he going to be able to balance out removing some sanctions, which he has just extended? And by the way, that was a big question for, I think, why did he extend sanctions on Russia in the first place for a year if he likes Putin so much? Again, the only explanation I can come up with is that if he removes sanctions, then why would Putin talk to him? So, okay, he has sanctions, but now he's offering to remove them in exchange for what? Maybe Putin letting him on a Red Square? So I think we've got some really kind of a silly circus kind of stuff, which is what happens when you elect a clown. And so we are dealing with the consequences of this situation every day. And whether Putin will accept Trump as his one and only, well, no, of course, Xi Jinping will also be there. So I suppose Donald Trump will also need to say that we've won, or at least, probably won, trade war with China, which is going to be considerably harder because Chinese seem to be pretty serious about this trade war because it sounds like they wanted to decouple from the United States, and this was the excuse they needed. And on top of that, we're now analyzing, there's a nice article by retired Admiral Stavridis about 5 reasons reasons, 5 signs that this can turn into a hot war with China. Will Donald Trump be able to stand on Red Square next to Putin and next to Xi Jinping at this difficult time where it's really important for, that's a drama. Why watch any sort of a, soap opera when you can just watch this madness unfold in front of our eyes?
And China and Xi Jinping is looking after all this and see like white flag. You can do everything. You can annex Taiwan or you can support Russia because nothing will be. So Trump shows that the US is weak and unconfident and China can do everything they want.
It's only if you judge reality for what it is. But if you live in Trump world, then it's entirely different. Because in Trump world, as soon as we tell China that we're going to stop buying their cheap crap, they're going to be like, oh no, we better do something about this. Oh. Otherwise, we're all going to die of this, I don't know, COVID something because that's China. China. And there's a lot of problems with that because we've entirely fooled ourselves by getting this trend, it appears, in Washington, where not that I'm anywhere near, but I'm just reading analysts who seem to, like Thomas Friedman, who insists that we've been telling ourselves only bad things about China for a substantial number of years. It was unpopular to say anything good about China. Well, we kind of, again, propaganda got us into this situation where Americans seems to have forgotten to what extent we're interconnected with the rest of the world, starting with China. And if anybody forgets, walk into Walmart, look at the shelves, see where stuff is made. And I think that this kind of a situation is very dangerous for America because for a consumer-based society to start a trade war with an authoritarian state is so incredibly dumb that because consumers are going to get upset before an authoritarian or his, subjects, peasants are going to get upset. And so, this is the situation. Of course, we should acknowledge that J.D. Vance, who called the Chinese peasants, is now being freely roasted on Chinese social media. So they're using all of this stuff to they're not trying to wind things down either. So the situation with China could be quite difficult, and it will lead to really United States getting poorer. The problem is that one of the ways that a dictator or a tyrant can gather more power is by making their population poorer, because a rich population has a lot of opinions, has feelings about freedoms, different things, but a poor population has different set of concerns. So it is to Donald Trump's interest, really, to make Americans poorer. And that's, I think, one of the effects that we're seeing of this trade war with China, not to mention that we are now seeing stories about immigrants self-deporting from the United States rather than dealing with our ICE and our border enforcement, which is now going to be lavished by Congress with huge amount of extra funding, probably, and then we have the whole situation with Salvador and that whole mess over there. So the United States is having a heck of a time, and to think that removing sanctions or would be helpful, would be good to China right now. Having a war with China seems like a really last thing that any country in our position would want to do. But not only is bad ideas seem to be a feature of this administration, but they seem to be they're not just like doing the right things mistakenly, or they're doing like what they're trying to do well, but they're not doing it well. No, they're trying to do bad things and they're failing at them, and then they're causing all sorts of consequences they're not capable of managing. And the only thing I can try to figure out is, are they doing it because they're so terrible or because they're doing it on purpose? And there seems to be plenty of reasons to suggest that it could be both.
Yuri, we saw several posters which have shown this week that Trump's ratings are falling by at least 5%. What main key issues are currently influencing these figures? And can we already talk about a decline in Americans' trust in Trump's actions and policies? Or maybe this only numbers for this period?
Number one thing that people always associated with Donald Trump is businessman. He was supposed to be good at business and therefore economy. Why people didn't associate with Donald Trump the fact that he had 6 bankruptcies is wishful thinking on part of people who want to be fooled, because it's not like this is new information. And so what he's likely to do, and what his support is not quite cratering, but it is slowly declining, which is supposed to be a good sign, because when his support craters because of something, then it bounces back. But if it slowly just kind of goes worse and worse and worse, then there's real hope that as part of his declining support, as infamously now said Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer, once his support declines to in the 30s, it will be easier to take on him, which is true. And it might be taking just a few more days for him to get there, because every day we have a barrage of bad news that can be assigned, that can be laid at responsibility, be laid at the feet of this administration. So whether you have people who are upset about economy, or about vaccines, or about medications, or about veterans, or about unemployment, or, you know, there's so many issues that are getting to people, and that people are starting to question. And of course, we're dealing with 3 groups of people in the United States, which, let's say, are Democrats, Republicans, and in the middle. And Democrats were against Trump. They still are against Trump. That hasn't changed. But the independents are turning on Trump, and his base is still with him. Again, a reasonable suspicion that his floor is somewhere around 32%. So he's not going to be less popular than 32%, which is interesting. Like, could you have concentration camps and this kind of policies? That I think is really the idea of sending Americans and just native-born American citizens to Salvador is really freaking a lot of people out. This is like even beyond we don't want a king. This is like you can take anybody that you assigned a name or a charge of terrorist, and without due process, you can send that person to Salvador concentration camp. So popularity of president is going down slowly. Also, there's not everybody's paying attention to the news. But as we see news and we see economic information and economic reality and the price increases going up and inflation, that's going to be very much a reality no matter what Donald Trump says. He did say there's going to be like problems and adjustments in the beginning. Yeah, very serious one. So we shall see how this is going to turn out, because I think that there could be an outcome. Because I think that is the problem is what happens as his support collapses, but there's no elections coming up. So we have options like, what are people going to do? And so this is where we see there's going to be another protest on the 19th. There's also hope that, again, lower popularity is that more Republican congressmen, senators will take a stand. Like we see that there's 7 Republican co-sponsors in the Senate against the bill on basically taking a power of tariffs away from president. It's not like they're going to do it tomorrow. Mike Johnson in the House of Representatives already said he's not going to even take a look at it. But the fact is that they're opening the door. They're creating this escape hatch for themselves and for the country, depending on what happens. So there is a little bit of this kind of a movement we're already seeing, but it's still very much premature. It's very much kind of behind closed doors, and we're still not at a point where Republicans are openly, except for maybe Representative Don Bacon, who bravely criticized the president for a couple of issues. We really don't hear Republicans speaking up, and that's so important, is that we need to hear Republican voters, Republican lawmakers, legislators. They're the ones who need to start speaking up and saying what dangerous place this is putting our country in.
Yes, and what kind of future will wait to the US and to the whole world? This is a big question, and now we have different answers, not very pleasant, but we have as we have. Yuri, thank you very much for this true and good conversation, for your opinions and thoughts. See you next week. Take care.
Take care.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English, and local elected official in Wisconsin, was with me, Irina Uzlova, and with us. Thank you guys for viewing, for watching. Left your comments and subscribe to our YouTube channels. Take care.